قال إنا منكم وجلون قالوا لا توجل إنا نبشرك بغلام عليم قال أبشرتموني على أن مسني الكبر فبم تبشرون قالوا بشرناك بالحق فلا تكن من القانطين قالوا بشرناك بالحق فلا تكن من القانطين قال ومن يقنط من رحمة ربه إلا الضالون صدق الله العلي العظيم اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد وعجل فرجهم
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. Let's begin with salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Jazakallah, Brother Mehdi, for the beautiful recitation. May Allah accept it from you. Welcome to class number 3 of our course on principles of Islamic family building, term 2. Can you turn off the echo, please? Thank you. Ahsan. We're going to begin just as we have for the previous classes with a inshallah, something that will be a spiritual reminder for all of us. This is a general reminder about one of the fruits of our faith. Like when somebody has iman, it has implications on the way they approach things, the way that they interpret different events that are taking place, the way that they navigate the challenges that come up through family life, challenges with their spouse, challenges with their children. Like it changes when somebody has iman, somebody has faith. This is one of the traditions which describes how it should change, how it should be. So it's a hadith which is widely reported from the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, where he says, "The good of this world and the hereafter has never been given to a believer except by means of his good opinion of Allah and his having hope in Him, his excellent conduct, and desisting from backbiting the believers." So there's 3 things that are mentioned. One of them is having good opinion of Allah and having hope in Him, meaning that that's, synonyms. Like when somebody has dhann, they don't suspect God of like trying to plot against them. They don't suspect God of like, trying to like give them the short end of the stick. They have a good opinion in Allah, and they have a lot of hope in whatever happens, that it's for the best. There's wisdom behind everything. Number two is husnul khulq, meaning like excellent conduct. And number three is desisting from backbiting the believers. Now, not backbiting is an example of husnul khulq, but because of its importance, it's singled out here as being really key. So these are three things. Now, if somebody has these three things, then that is a key to unlocking the good of this world and the hereafter for a believer. For a non-believer, for disbeliever, they might get what they think is the good of this world without doing these things. They don't have hope in Allah. They have hope in their own, abilities. They have hope in their bank accounts. They have hope in their family legacy. They have hope in their looks and their people skills, those type of things. And they might get what they think is the good of the world. But for a believer, what really is the good of this world, which of course is limited, and what is the good of the hereafter, which is what we're here for, is given to them by means of these three things. Why? Because Allah is noble and generous, and in His hand are all good things. He is shy of His believing servant having good opinion of Him and then going against that opinion and hope. Therefore, have a good opinion of Allah and desire from Him. It's very important, when, again, just to reiterate that in the course of raising children, right, there's a lot of like ups and downs, right? And sometimes we're like, why have I been like this? If I've been cursed, right? Have I been like, what is it that's going on? Why me? Why this? I look at the other kids, they're so like, other people have said it's so easy. Like they can have 5, 6 kids and everything's fine with them. And look at me, I'm struggling with 1 or 2. Like what's going on? And so many other things like that. And if we just step back and look at our situation, there's a lot of unknowns, right? We don't understand a lot of what's going on, why it's going on. Who knows, the difficulties that we're going through right now, one day they might result in like just wonderful outcomes, right? It's like planting a seed and then not seeing the result of it for years and years. That's the way tarbiyah works, right? You plant the seed and you might not see the fruit for 21 years later, but you're doing it. I mean, the things that a mother does when the child is in her womb, she might not see the results until 20 years later, 25 years later, 30 years later. But she doesn't do it for instant gratification. She does it because it's the right thing to do, and having good opinion of Allah, and having a positive approach to interpreting the different events that take place. Okay, so with that, we're going to launch into our class for today. We're a little bit behind schedule, but inshallah, we're trying. And for those of you who have not been part of this class before, we do have a online repository for the course notes, these different slides, and also weekly homework, which is not really that big of a deal. It doesn't take that much time, but it will help you to put into practice whatever you're being reminded of or whatever you are learning. Remember that knowledge is only truly knowledge when we act upon it. And so doing the homework is a way of actually putting it into practice. Alhamdulillah, a number of you did submit the homework for the first week, and I hope that the rest of you who didn't will inshallah catch up. It is okay to audit this course and not do the homework. That's perfectly fine. But I just highly encourage you to do the homework as well. It will help you. And then the class recordings for the previous term of 8 sessions, and then the previous 2 for this term are available on the SABA YouTube channel. Our timings are 7 to 8. We have 8 sessions in total. We've done 2 sessions of the 8 for this semester. Okay, so 2 classes ago, we started this term by talking about 4 ways of acknowledging the karama of our children. They are human beings, and human beings are created with in a mold of being dignified. They have karama. And there was 4 practical ways that had to do with the way that that acknowledgement is reflected in the way that we communicate with our children. Okay, and the way that we follow up on the communication that we have. So there was 4 examples of that: how we call to them, how we greet them, how we make requests from them, and how we respond to requests from them. So the first homework was actually an opportunity for the students in this class to put this into practice. If they have children, with their children; if not, then with any family members. And alhamdulillah, the responses were wonderful. I'm going to highlight a few responses. Just I thought they would be useful to share. Of course, that doesn't mean that if I don't share yours, it wasn't profound, it wasn't insightful. Alhamdulillah, all of them are insightful. And at the end of the day, what really matters is if it had an effect for you, meaning that you actually saw that these teachings do yield results. So the first one is this, that I have been raised to understand that aggression and a serious tone is one to respect and pay attention to. However, I was humbled to learn that this is not the case, and while kids will listen out of fear, there is no respect and that connection gained. As we talked about before, that fear might yield immediate results, but it's really for that amount of time. It's not going to be something which is long-lasting. And eventually that child, when they grow up, they're going to realize that, hey, what can you do to me, right? If you threaten me physically, I'm going to call 911 on you, right? I'll call 911 on you, and they'll be very bold. That's what they're told all the time. They learn about this. And at the end of the day, I mean, it's not the right approach, right? That which is gained through respect and connection is long-lasting, right? That's what will, inshallah, be the most effective tool that we have with our children. Second response, when I'm regulated, it is much easier to acknowledge the God-given karama of fellow family members. When I'm dysregulated, this task becomes quite challenging. I'm working on being more intentional with my own emotional and spiritual well-being in order to better serve my family. If I can't regulate, I'm not even focusing on my own dignity, much less the dignity of my family members. So this was a wonderful, insightful response where this individual is saying that it all starts with the parent themselves, right? If we're able to realize that we have been created for being dignified beings, and we are striving to live up to those expectations. Of course, we might slip once in a while, so we do tawbah, right? But we're striving for that. We're striving for that in our akhlaq. We're striving for that in our knowledge. We're always like working up the ladder. Then that is the most effective way of then being able to treat other people with karama. There was a brother who was talking to me some time back, and he was having some marital problems. So he said this very interesting thing. He said that I can talk about different issues. I can discuss things. I can bring up things. But the most effective thing I find in terms of being able to influence my family members is when inside of myself I feel that type of dignity and that connection to Allah. He used the word haiba, meaning that type of like, when somebody is connected to Allah, they feel a type of like dignity, and there's an aura about them, right? They have a haiba, they have an aura about them, right? It's like kind of like one of like, okay, well, you know, you can do whatever you want, right? But at the end of the day, like I have somebody guarding my back, right? Allah is with me, right? And it's one thing to say it, it's another thing to actually feel that, like the glow of that iman. So that itself is something which can just have a huge impact on other people's behavior. When somebody has that sukoon inside, it creates that environment of sukoon around them. There's a lot of studies these days which are showing more and more that this concept of intergenerational trauma, that when the parents might suffer, let's say, whatever trauma, it actually gets passed through the DNA to their children. There's studies which show that when parents go through divorce, it's something like unbelievable, like 50% chance more that the children will go through divorce, right? And many other similar things which show that like there's a lot that gets transferred to our children just by the way that we are as parents. So it's those parents who think that by sacrificing their spirituality, sacrificing their remembrance of Allah, giving up their program of ibadah completely for their children, that they're going to actually do a service to them, they need to step back and reconsider that actually this could be a great disservice to them. It might achieve short-term results, but in long term, it's not going to give them that type of sukoon, because we know that the true sukoon is attained through being connected to Allah. Now, of course, that doesn't mean that somebody should ignore the needs of their child and just do ibadah. Everything is about balance. Okay, number 3, if they are upset, I don't ridicule them, and I try to meet them where they are emotionally and help them solve the problem. If I need something from them, I make sure that they finish whatever they are doing before they fulfill my request. I call them by endearing names. In general, I hope that I'm respectful to them. So this parent is doing everything. MashaAllah. Keep it up. Now this is really interesting, insightful. However, the challenge is when I am mad at them or they're not listening to me and I'm already under pressure from other tasks. It is during those times that I start to forget and might become a little bit harsh with them. Any advice that you have for this parent? Because I'm sure this comes up, right? Like, it's like I have this plan to, like, you know, kind of keep my cool and really treat others with respect. And then, like, when things get stressed, right, then I just, you know, it becomes tough for me. Anything that you do that works, or any suggestions? The microphone is ready. Anybody? Brother Mehdi?
I just want to say, like, I think in general, it's very easy to do these things when things are, you know, in good situations. It's always under those circumstances where you are under pressure, where, you know, those mistakes usually happen. And I feel like if we are constantly working on ourselves, as you mentioned, this whole spiritual aspect of it, and working on these skills, when times get tough and the pressure is there, then you succeed in those situations. But if you are not, if you haven't done enough prep work, whatever that may be, you know, through worship and through, you know, perhaps other channels, if you haven't done that, then when it comes time for the test, you know,
Sure.
you basically end up doing something you didn't want to do.
Awesome. So know that you're going to be tested and prepare for it. Excellent. Yes, sister.
When I'm mad or I'm under pressure, I usually just take a break. Like, if I want to say something to my daughter, I would count to 10. I would literally count to 10 and take a deep breath, or I might walk out of the room and, you know, take a few breaths and then come back, and then I would respond to her or whatever. So I think just taking a break and counting to 10 helps me. I don't know about that.
Thank you. Thank you. And that's in line with the hadith that we have about not making decisions when you're angry. You know, not like taking action on something and you know, doing something to change the situation for yourself. Excellent. Thank you. Number 4, my children responded positively to all of them, although sometimes the issue we were discussing did not change much, but the environment was much calmer. The result may have been the same as before. Like, my kids were still delaying in responding to directions or getting something done, but having that shift in the environment because of treating them with that dignity, filled with respect and peace, kept them and us as the parents quite calm, right? So in the long run, this calmness and this peace is something which will, again, make the home be that attractive, like, this is home base, right? This is where I always want to go back to, right? I don't want to go far from this because that's where I find my peace. And that's so worth investing in. Okay. So in class number 2, so last week we talked about 3 actions to avoid in order to respect the God-given dignity of our children. Avoid using distasteful language. Remember the hadith of Imam Bakr Islam, the weapon of the dignified people is ugly speech. Number 2, avoid making fun of a child. Number 3, avoid harsh scolding, reprimand, and rebuking them for mistakes that they make. And there was a hadith from Imam Islam. He says that if somebody often scolds, if that's their main way of disciplining, right, of scolding and reprimanding, then that is going to result in ill will and it causes enmity. Okay, now, we had gotten to this example. Every time Malik, who's 10 years old, plays video games, his father starts getting annoyed. He often scolds him severely about playing too much video games and how it's going to affect him in the long term. Rather than things getting better, it's now getting worse. Malik often plays behind his father's back when he's not supposed to. So, we just touched on this briefly at the end of last class, but I was thinking about it, and also based on one of the questions that was asked by one of the students, that I can't just mention it and just like pass by, because it is something which a lot of parents have questions about. And so I did want to spend a little bit of time on this and going into a little bit more detail about how would we respond to this, and in general, what are some things to keep in mind when it comes to video games. So first of all, let's go back and revisit this scenario. Okay, they have a boy, and boys tend to play video games, right? These days, girls tend to play video games as well. Some stats say that perhaps like 50%, 50% even, right? So it's becoming something, I don't know, it's become something which is now for boys and for girls. So because the father and mother know this, right, they want to create a lifestyle which is balanced, right, which is holistic, which isn't just conformant to whatever the dominant way of doing things is. And that's what intelligent people do, right? As I mentioned in the past, if you look at people who are tech savvy and they're in positions of power and authority, they know what this technology does. Like, they know how addictive it can become. They know the long-term effects of it. They don't let their kids get into the stuff that they themselves make. That same industry they're part of, they don't let their kids get into it, right? So they safeguard. So they take the time and creative energy to build a balanced and holistic lifestyle that does not center around entertainment, especially entertainment from devices. The other night, I was thinking about this, like we had a free weekend night, okay? And I was thinking to myself that in American culture, when people have a free weekend night, what do they typically do? Let's say you're at home with the family, it's a free weekend night. What's the number one thing that people will do? Tell me. Movie night, right? Okay. And I was thinking that, you know, that time that I was living in Qom in Iran, I was thinking that on exactly the same situation where we have a night where we're free, right, what do? Right, you get in the car, you go to the haram, and you spend time in the company of the member of the Ahlul Bayt. Right? And I was like, subhanAllah, like, you know, some things like you're just like, you know, like, I don't know, it just hit me that like, what a difference, what a stark difference between like here, you know, you don't meet anybody, you're just, you know, revolving around this technology, you're just staring at it, there's no communication between you, versus going somewhere, you're like meeting people, you're like hearing things, you're like remembering things, like just a lot of sights and sounds, you know, like it's very different. That's lifestyle. Now, we don't have a haram to go to, right? But this is where we need to be creative, right? What can we do to actually have healthy interactions? So that's number one. Number two, Malik's parents have a loving and respectful relationship with Malik, and they have a strong relationship between themselves. Okay, why? Because they know that video game addicts often come from difficult home environments, right? There's like a correlation here, right? There's something about video games which very much attracts people who have difficult home lives. Video games serve as a form of escape and a way to numb distress and discomfort. For teenage boys' brains in particular, video game addiction can be destructive because they provide fulfilling sensations for the reward centers of the teenage boy's brain that need intense amounts of stimulation to be engaged. They don't want Malik to be addicted as a pre-adolescent. So for boys in particular, if there's a boy and he's playing a lot of video games at the age of like 5, it's not too hard to get him off of that. If he's doing that at the age of 10, it's not too hard to get him off of that. But if he's doing it at the age of 13, it's very, very difficult to get him off of that, right? Why is that? It has to do with the changes in the brain, right? That same boy who would be very easily like entertained with something, just a game or something like that when he was 10, when he turns 13, now he finds it boring. But video games come and they know how to trigger those pleasure centers and flood them with so much dopamine that it becomes like this incredible feeling for that child, right? So these parents are aware of this, right? They don't need to go into the deep depths of that neuroscience, but they should know this. They know that, like, especially for a brain of a boy, it's dangerous, right, to become addicted. Right, now, when Malik shows interest in video games, the parents will not go out of their way to feed that interest. Okay, I see sometimes, you know, parents, grandparents are like, oh, we want to do something good for our child, so let's gift them with like this and that, and like, you know, the latest and greatest, and like, you know, the 3D virtual, whatever it's called, that Facebook developed, Meta, what's it called, that thing? Oculus, Quest, and, you know, glasses, and I don't know what, no one. It's like we love you, and therefore we're showering you with this. No, please don't shower him with that stuff, right? Like, you know, So they don't go out of their way to feed. They tell the grandparents that if you want to show him love, do it in a different way. Buy him a roller skates, or like, I don't know, like the stuff that kids are supposed to do, right? Like a bike or whatever, a camera. Nor will they allow others to do this. Nor will they completely deprive him. Okay, if he really is interested in, okay, fine, it's not haram, right? So it's not like, so they're not going to deprive him completely either. They will fully understand what he is playing and whom he is playing with. They will also set limits for how much can be played and involve Malik in this process. Malik, let's sit down, let's talk about it, right? What is this thing here, right? What are you playing, right? Let's talk about what is it reasonable? What's reasonable given everything that's going on, you know? Maybe, for example, maximum half an hour on weekdays, and then like, let's say, you know, on weekends, you know, maybe whatever, 45 minutes, an hour, right? There's limits, okay? They will not make him feel guilty about playing within those limits, right? Because that's what they agreed on. So fine, you're doing that. They will never use gaming as a substitute for spending quality time with him. So it's not like that now he's gaming, therefore their job is become, they don't have to do that time. No, they still spend time with him. They will praise Malik for observing his limits. If he ever goes outside of the limits, they will gently but firmly remind or even reprimand him. Okay? So there is still room here for scolding, okay? But not intense and excessive scolding. I just want to make that clear. Right? That's still a valid disciplinary technique. Now, sometimes that can be done indirectly as well. Right? Like, for example, let's say he goes over like 5 minutes. Malik, what time is it? Right? He's like, oh, you know, oh, sorry, you know, like, so you didn't have to say the whole thing that, oh, you know, this, oh, you went over your time for the 10th time, whatever. No, what time is it? Okay, you convey the message indirectly. Right? Now, let's say he repeats it, then you bring up something like, okay, well, you know, this is what happened. Right? So this is a more like kind of comprehensive way to dealing with it. Now, a few things about video games. Number one, this is just a summary. I did a seminar about this. It's available on the Rise Academy YouTube channel if somebody's interested. And some of these points are new. That's why I wanted to mention it. But anyhow, it robs children of healthy pastimes, particularly addictive for teenage boys, can often involve violent and indecent content that desensitizes and or unhealthily stimulates a child, promotes practically living in imaginary worlds far from haqq and haqiqah, the truth and reality, comes along with an entire culture of mocking, dissing, swearing, and uncontrolled anger. I wanted to just test whether this is really the case or not. So I just looked up who's the most popular gaming streamer person, right? I just thought, let me just check it out, right? I was like, okay, let me just see. Okay, the very first video they came up, I just played it, right? Within like 30 seconds, right? He was like, you know, laying on the expletives, right? And this is somebody who's considered mild, like family friendly, but he was already like getting into like his cuss words and whatnot. And apparently, like, you know, he's like the most widely, he's like the guru of all gurus, and you know, but it's not just the words, it's the culture. It's like this kind of way of looking at things. Like a lot of times they make commentary about politics, about social issues, about parents, about a lot of other stuff. Like they really do command they influence deeply the people who listen to them, these influencers. I mean, that's why they get paid so much. Okay, let's go to this one. One day, Rubina's dad was criticizing her, as he often did, for not unloading the dishes on time. Then she asked him to unload the dishes. He criticized them so much about it. I really didn't do good on the English there. You get the point, right? So he's criticizing her for not unloading the dishes on time. So she, you know, rebuttals, and she says that, why don't you unload the dishes? Since you're talking about all of them, you're so worried about it, you go ahead and do it yourself. What followed was pure rage and anger. Any analysis of the situation here? What's going on? Comments?
I just want to share that this happens, like, I think in this day and age, like children that are very young also, you know, they're more innocent, they speak back and they tell you that. And then it's really a moment to reflect. Like for me, let's say it was that, because I was asking, I was like, yeah, like it's not like she's getting paid to do this, or like it was something that she was supposed to do. So when she turned it back around and went towards me, It was definitely.
Okay. So it happens. So what do you, how would you analyze this? What would you do? What's happening here? What do you understand from this?
So in that situation, if someone were to get angry, then the best thing would be is not to say something, because I feel like when you get angry, you say things that you don't mean, but it just comes off that way. So the father could be like, he could start loading it, and then, or he could take a moment to calm himself down, and then he could start loading the dishwasher a little bit, like slowly by slowly, and then he can ask his daughter, be like, hey, Rubina, can you please come and we can do this together, you know? And maybe it, depending on her age, you know, like, oh, if you do this, then we can go out and get your favorite treat or something.
Okay. Okay, interesting. Thank you. Anybody else? Yes, brother.
It seems that the father criticizes her more than he praises her, and also criticizes her rather than telling her how to do it better, just plainly criticizing her, such that she has just become annoyed. Okay, I don't know what to do. She's not basically getting his message. It seems like.
Thank you.
So there's a saying that say, al-waladu sirrabi, the kid is the hidden secret of the dad. One thing that I can see within the lines is the fact that the father probably never unloaded the dishes. Then it becomes a surprise to the kid that, like, how come you're not, like, unloading the dishes? So the very idea that action speaks louder, or like kunu da'at an-nas baghir al-sin. So, like, again, if you have a environment that the parents are just doing things and then the kids are seeing them doing that, so it's not becoming something as a new or surprise, or out of the expectation. They will be doing the same thing as well. They will find it pretty much normal or natural.
Awesome. Thank you. So that's great. I think your points were insightful. If we just step back and look at the situation, it's important for the dad to, as you guys were doing, to really ask himself the question that, why is she not unloading the dishes on time? Is it deliberate, right? Or is she just, it's just like she doesn't realize, right? Like it's like one of those things. It's like she just doesn't remember. It's not on her radar, right? She's busy doing other things. So if it's not something which she's doing deliberately, then what's the point of like getting upset and angry about it, right? Why is she not doing it? And then he thinks about it. So okay, from one of them could be that maybe she's being told something, but she's not seeing it in practice, right? He's one of those people who's really good at telling other people what to do, but never does anything himself. Well, okay, so he can start showing her that what does it mean to actually do, to help out at home. Another one might be that he enabling her, like brother Salman mentioned, that how can he make it easier for her? How can he teach her? How can he, just do it, maybe put it as part of the routine. It's not part of routine, so right now it's just kind of, random, so then she doesn't know when to do it and then just forgets about it. But at the end of the day, like just responding with pure rage and anger, I mean, he's asking for this, right? Because remember the hadith of Imam Ali Islam, when you frequently scold somebody, then this is the result. You're going to get that type of defiance. Okay, this is one, I took it from one of the books that has some interesting examples. I give the reference there, where this one mother is like, okay, when my daughter lost her subway pass and she thought it fell out of her pocket, my first impulse was to bawl her out for being so careless, but she looked so miserable that I said, come to think of it, Karen, you've held onto your subway pass for the last 3.5 terms of high school. That's a lot of days of being responsible. So she turns what could be a very negative moment into a praiseworthy moment, right? So This is honoring the dignity of this person right here, right? So like, you can think about like a child who breaks a glass, who breaks your favorite plate, who like does this, where our immediate reaction would be to like really hone in on this thing right here. Well, it's like, okay, you let's say that they're unwilling dishes, they break a dish. So for like 2 years or for a year you haven't broken a dish. Alhamdulillah. Okay, so now you broke your first dish. All right. Inshallah, you can be more careful next time. Right? So, the response here was that I guess so, but she herself realizes that she needs to do something to enable her to be more careful next time. So basically the point with that was that like sometimes dealing with misbehavior or mistakes or whatever with praise. So let's say somebody were to repeatedly scold, reprimand, and rebuke. The effects would be distancing the child from the parent, right? It's basically pushing away the child. Number 2, creating enmity between the child and the parent. Number 3, creating that sense of rebellion and stubbornness. Okay, so this concludes this portion, these 3 things to avoid: using distasteful language, making fun of them, and then harsh scolding. Now, before moving on to the next topic, I wanted to mention 2 points of non-verbal ways of acknowledging the dignity of a child, because all these ways we've been talking about have to do with the way that we communicate verbally. But there are a number of things where dignity is upheld, strengthened through the way we behave, the way we act. So I'm going to mention a couple of them tonight, inshallah. Number 1 is paying the right amount of attention to them. So acknowledging the dignity of a human being is really like acknowledging that human beings need attention. It's something which is the way that God made them, that they would want that and seek that attention. And parents would give that attention to them when they seek it. Now, this is something which is like the ABCs. Any parent knows this, right? But where a lot of times we struggle on is how much attention, right? Too much or too little. And we have parents all across the spectrum, where sometimes it ranges into like negligence, right? The child's on their own, they don't get any attention even though they're seeking it, and then bad things happen. Sometimes it's like way too much indulgence, okay? So I want to give a few guidelines on this topic because, again, even it might seem like simple, but it is something which comes up a lot. And when we think about the way we practice our parenting, we might realize that, okay, there's something I can take from this. So when showing that respect means that we give them the attention when they seek it, generally speaking, we give them that attention. Number 2, if the attention they want involves some action, perform that action in a timely manner. And you have those parents who are really good about, like, let's say, showing their children a lot of love, whatever like that, but sometimes the children don't really want love and talk, they want action, right? So it's like they give them a promise and they're like, okay, what happened 1 week, 2 weeks, 1 month, 2 months, and then the children are like, this is just a show. My parent doesn't really care about me. Number 3 is that let's say that there's something which is taking up our attention and it's making it so that we're not paying enough attention to our children. Why are we giving more importance to that thing? I'll give you an example. That there are some people who are like obsessive about keeping their home clean. Right? Now, we have the opposite where some people just don't give priority to it at all, right? And it's just something like whatever, right? It's like dishes aren't done, like, stuff is unmade and clothes all over the place, whatever, right? That's not healthy. That's not in line with Islamic teachings. Islamic teachings promote cleanliness, orderliness. It brings sukoon, like, the whole thing of having like that peace. But let's say that somebody's on the other side of things where they're very particular about that, to the point where they give more attention to their home and keeping it clean than they do to their child, right? Which sometimes can happen. Okay, so then we have to ask ourselves, well, why is this so important for me to go to this level, right, of cleanliness where I'm going to neglect the needs of my child, right? Is there something I can do where it would maybe tone it down, right? Or let's say that, I'm into something else, like maybe I have a hobby, I'm into golf, let's say. I've never been golfing before, but somebody's really obsessed with golf, right? And that prevents them from giving their children that attention they need. And so many other things that could come up community service work and other things which would prevent them from giving their child the attention they need. Let's look at a scenario. Saliha walks in the room where her father is busy typing up something for work. This is one of the days where they're allowed to work remote work. She is excited about her upcoming trip, and she wants to ask him questions about it while kicking around her soccer ball. After a delay, he acknowledges her with a grunt, barely. She continues talking for a while, but after some time of receiving no response, she walks away to find a device where she can chat with her friends. Okay, what do you think would be a better way to deal with this? Now, remember, the poor father is, well, I don't know if I'm poor or not, but the guy he's working, right? So what's another way he could have dealt with this? Yes? Microphone.
First thing would be to tell his daughter that give me a couple of minutes, I'm working, and then yeah, so like acknowledging that she's there, but also acknowledging the fact that I have work to finish and that I will listen to you after I'm done with it.
Okay. Excellent. Anybody else? Anything?
That's walks away to find a device where she can. So does she have a device like a phone or something like that she usually chats with her friends? I just want to make it in addition to the brother's comment, complete that. So because the behavior of father was not good, definitely, but the thing is that she's 9 years old, and this in the sentence mentioned, it looks like she has a device like a phone or something, and she has access to chat with her friends. And I think in that age is not the appropriate age to have this kind of device. And that's alarming, but definitely the father, as the brother mentioned, he need to ask the daughter, just give me a couple of minutes in the kind way, and after that, spend time with her.
Excellent. Thank you for picking up on that. I appreciate that. Yes.
Yeah, I was gonna say, like, I think the key here is to let her know how much he's interested in listening to what she is excited about. So it's like, I really actually want to hear about this, but right now I'm trying to finish this. Could we set up a time to talk about it, like maybe a little later, and then that validation?
Yeah. Excellent. Thank you. So the reason why she has the phone is because there's a need that she has that's not being fulfilled, right, by her parents, right? I mean, because obviously there's a whole backstory to this as well, right? This is just one scenario. So, like you guys said, her father immediately lifts his head up and makes himself present to her, right? Like that intentionality that, we've been talking about. He smiles at her and gives her some quick answers and kicks the ball around a couple of times with her. After seeing that she wants to talk even more, he says, is it okay if we talk about this after dinner? I'm just a little, I'm a little bit busy just now. After dinner, he calls her and asks, so now he's keeping his promise, right? Like, you don't just like say things, you actually keep your promise. He himself remembers, right? And he follows up with it. Now, Saliha, tell me, what was it that you wanted to talk about earlier? Sorry, I was busy with something and I couldn't talk to you then. Okay, so this type of approach is what's meant here by paying attention. It doesn't mean that you necessarily need to drop everything all the time, because that doesn't work. That's not how life actually works. So when somebody has this thing of paying attention, it builds love and attraction towards the parents, because when a child feels respected, they will love the person who's respecting them. Number two, it prevents children from being attracted to others who would pay attention to them, right? Like the device, like social media, those things. Let's say friends, where at this age, there's no need for them to be really chatting with their friends after school. Why? Practically teaching children to respect other people. Oh, that one belongs to the next one. Okay, so we'll get to that. All right, now, this is key here, that when is it that paying attention can be too much or harmful? Number one is when it leads to other children feeling bad, right? Meaning that sometimes when, let's say that there's multiple children, now I'm giving attention in a way where it's sort of like, praising this child in a way that another child is going to feel bad, right? So I need to be careful about how I give that attention, what words I say. I don't want to make the other child jealous. Number two, when it leads to overindulgence, entitlement, and a fixed mindset. Sometimes by giving too much attention, paying attention to like every little detail, commenting on everything, entertaining all requests all the time, whatever, that can lead to, you know, a child who's just basically like feels entitled, you know, like overprivileged, you know, everything needs to be there for them all the time. And they also feel like there's no room to grow, so they have a fixed mindset. Now, single child families should be particularly aware of this, right? It's just one of those things, right, that can happen, right? That, you know, when you have one child at home, because they're the focus of attention. Sometimes if you have multiple children, naturally the attention gets distributed. Naturally, the child learns about patience and having to wait in line. You know, having to a lot of things. They just fall into place. Now, doesn't mean that those things can't be taught. They can, but it just means the parents need to have more attention to this. That how do they navigate this when they, you know, when they could indulge everything, they need to like deliberately regulate that. And then the third point is that when it leads to an obsession with what some of the psychologists are calling safetyism, right? I think you probably have heard about this, like the coddling of the American child, for example. This obsession with keeping the child like safe, you know, just and not face any harm. And it can lead to a lack of reliance on Allah and prevents children from learning important lessons of life. There's a lot that can be learned when a child is at least feels like they're not being watched over tightly, like they don't feel like they're on a leash all the time. So let's look at this scenario here. So Amir is at the playground. He's 4 years old. He wants to run up the slide. Let's say I'm his father. I yell at him, Amir, don't do that. It's dangerous. After a while, he finds the mud at the side of the playground. He starts to dig into it. Amir, don't do that. It's dirty. An older boy comes near to him and dares him to jump off a high place to the padded ground. Amir, let's go. Didn't I tell you not to play with strangers? Apparently, when they build playgrounds, they have to make it so the padding goes like, I don't know, like 6 feet deep or something like that. It's not normal ground. Like you know, they really make it. So, what do you think? What's happening here? Like, is this positive? Like, is it a good approach here for the parent to be taking this sort of thing? Any comments? Yes.
I feel like with most parents, they are gonna have that sense of worry, but I think at that time, like, you build that trust within your child that, like, okay, yeah, you have to watch them, but like you can't always voice your worry, because then I feel like that can make them like self-conscious about like, oh, I have to ask permission for everything I do. I mean, yes, they want to respect their parent, but like at the same time, they're not going to be confident enough to like do something on their own, even if it's something very small.
Yeah. Exactly. So it's something which is really gonna hamper the development of that self-confidence, right? Okay, thank you. Any other comments?
In this case, you see a lot of extremes. Like you see some parents are like very careful, and then another parent that just doesn't even look at the child, and child is rolling into the mud. I mean, just doing all kinds of stuff, right? And you usually find the couples they're in a conflict, right?
Yeah.
If the mom is way too worried, the dad's like, just let him, look at the other mom, she's so chill and nothing happens to her kid. But
yeah, we see this example at the center here, for example. Like there's a parent who has no clue where their child is, like absolutely no, like I don't get that personally. Like if I as a parent, like I need to know where my kids are. Like I mean, it's just like the basic thing. Now I don't need to necessarily like, I mean, come on, like.
I mean, yes, I always know where my kid is, obviously. And the other thing is like, obviously this parent, and we witnessed this in a pandemic where it became way overboard, right? Because parents were worried about, children getting sick, and then they would get COVID and then they were fine. And it was like, oh, wow, thank God we got COVID. Now we're not as worried as much. But obviously here, Amar's parent here is raising a child that's going to be scared of everything. The child's going to be resentful of this parent as well because they just want to have fun. And they're smart. They see other kids doing these things, having fun. Nothing's happening to them. But as soon as they take a step, so they start retaliating. When the kids get older, they retaliate. They say, oh, and they start making comments, especially if the parents are different takes. They make a comment to the dad like, yeah, mom's not letting us do anything. Why don't we go with you?
So, thank you.
Also, there are like a lot of don'ts. No, no, no. So there can be like positive adjectives can be used, like be careful, watch out, or kindly, rather than don't.
Yeah, it's true. But again, thank you for that. Just to keep in mind what Brother Mehdi mentioned, that, or I think Sister Ali mentioned, I forget, one of them, she was mentioning the thing about self-confidence, right? If you're always like, I mean, there's also the sense of like learning, and sometimes learning the hard way too, right? And if a parent's always like that voice, we talked about this a little while ago, I think last week or the week before, that becomes the voice that then speaks to them when they're adults. Like it's a voice which always tell them, don't take risks, don't go into this, don't, you can't do what, the way that you should, the things that you should be doing. So be careful about that. So when we're talking about paying attention doesn't necessarily mean that you're dropping everything, you're always like on the ground playing with their toys with them, because that's not healthy for them either. They need to play by themselves at times you need to play with them, right? I mean, every time they say they're bored doesn't mean that you have to drop everything. Of course, they need time, you need to give them, different children need different amounts of time as well too. But what it does mean is being aware of their needs and coming up with a program. That main thing is like have a plan for meeting those needs that they have. Being actively engaged, being aware. Sometimes it's being aware of what a child is doing without letting on. Right? This is also beneficial, useful. Just keeping tabs on them. To go off of what Brother Mehdi's point is about parents at both extremes, my own experience in just hearing parents and the way they do things with devices, you find some parents on that extreme where they have no clue, and sometimes at a very young age, the children are accessing things which are very not appropriate for them and very devastating. And then part of paying attention is learning or being aware of our responsibilities and best practices, understanding our children's temperaments, analyzing our children's behavior and looking for root causes, seeking help and advice. I'll give you an example. There are children who have food sensitivities, okay? And one of the ways that you discover this is by seeing how different food might trigger them, okay? There are children who don't have food sensitivities, but they're the type where depending on what they eat, it will really affect their behavior, right? Now, how do we discover these things, right? You could go and get tested and do all these type of things, which often isn't effective, and the children won't like it, and they don't like being told these things, right? Part of it is just really just observing and having that type of awareness, like what's actually going on with my child. And then adjusting, sometimes behind the scenes adjusting, right? Like, oh, we ran out of the Cocoa Puffs, right? So you have to deal with like you have to eat the cornflakes or whatever, right? Or we'll have to have oatmeal today. That's a better choice than processed cereal. Right? So some of these things, like, parents, like good parents will do this. They'll sometimes pay attention without paying attention, right? They're doing things in the background, like what a good manager is, kind of taking care of things in the background, and seeking help and advice, right? Sometimes just reaching out to fellow parents, right? Hey, have you ever dealt with this? What do you think, right? Reaching out to grandparents, reaching out to like older brothers and sisters, and seeing, get a fresh perspective, and seeing what other people would do. Okay, so just to summarize, we talked about paying the right amount of attention to them. The second way is, this concept is interesting. It's where you seek their permission when utilizing their things, because it's about showing respect, right? So sometimes as parents, we kind of think of like our stuff as being our child's stuff and their stuff as being our stuff, right? So let's say our kid comes up and they want to use our, I don't know, whatever, right? Like they want to wear your socks, or they want to like use your shoes, or they want whatever. They use your favorite cup or what. So you're like, oh, whatever, that's my kid. They can use whatever they want, right? You might have some food on your plate and it's good food, and your child comes and they want to eat it. You gladly give it to them. Like, go ahead, you can have it. I'll eat whatever. But sometimes we assume that, okay, that we should treat our child in the same way. And this is where we can do better, because part of that respect is understanding, especially when they get to like their pre-adolescent, adolescent years, that ownership matters to them, right? When they get to the age of puberty, like territory matters to them. Like, I have this territory, this is my territory. Right? That it's something which is important. It's part of like just their development. And they stake out their territory as well. So those are things which, it's an Islamic concept that I seek permission. Okay, is it okay if I get your clothes and I use them, put them in the washing, right? Is it okay if I use your pencil, right? And etc. Right? Like, there's things. Is it okay if, I mean, this food, like, you know, it's your thing. Is it okay if I use it? Now, it might be things that you bought for them, right? But now it's their property. So, and at least they think of it as their property. So it's like part of the respect is just, using and that, asking them, and that can be a way of training them to do the same thing, right? That, you know, when it comes to people's property, I'm going to respect that. Okay. I'm going to stop here. Are there any comments or questions? I think that we've done, we'll do this topic, inshallah, next time, dignity and independence. Any comments or questions? Yes. Yeah. Right. So the parents who say, I trust my child and I'm going to let them do whatever, they're not going to do anything wrong, that's sometimes the excuse that's given, right? It's very, it's naive, right? Because the world that they're navigating is, it's a very dangerous world, right? It's like putting a knife on the table and then a very sharp knife and saying that, oh, I trust my child that they're going to do the right thing with this knife, right? You don't do that. You put the knife on a high place. So this type of thing, it's not, I mean, just the YouTube ads, whatever. There's so much out there that it keeps on getting like harder and harder to like filter and block that type of content, right? So, it should be the case that the parents are right there. They're, until the child really is old enough to be able to navigate and they can trust them, right? Which takes some time. Definitely not children. Any other comments or questions? Yes, go ahead. If you can just pass the microphone, please. Thank you. There's something you check online as well too.
Okay, so the last scenario, look, the same time where we can let the child figure it out themselves or learn the hard way, but my first question is, what is the right age? Well, this is too much overprotective parent, but I'm saying, what is the right age for them to let them figure out things? And when you can trust the child and be like, okay, now he can figure it out himself. But then there's a certain age where they do need some assistance, and like some parents just leave their kids, right? So, and then the other kids who hang out with them suffer. So what's the middle ground where we can literally also intervene but yet not spoil their joy out of things?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I think that rather than saying this is what the age is, I think that maybe we can approach it from this perspective, that what's good and what's not good. So what's good is giving that child a sense of independence, right? Letting them make their own choices, letting them discover and really find themselves and discover the world around them. That's something which is positive, right? What's also good is being able to guide them, right? And point out kind of what's right and what's wrong. What's also good and important is preventing them from doing something which is harmful to themselves or to other people, or something which is like kind of gross or haram or something like that. Obviously, we don't want our children to do that. So if you take all these things together and you say that, well, what is the thing that the child wants to do? Like I was reading this story of this one person who, there's a type of parenting, we had talked about it some weeks back called free range parenting, right? If you remember. So the person who is like the proponent of that, she's saying that like the way she became famous was that her son was 9 years old and he really wanted to take the subway by himself. So she took him to like Macy's and she gave him like some quarters like to make a call in case he needed it. I guess at that time they didn't have cell phones, right? And she gave him the directions over it, and then she went. She just left him, right? And then he had to figure out how to get home, right? And so when he did that, he actually made it home, you know. And then she posted on social media. She became like the most hated parent, like, you know, in the world, because everyone's like, how could you possibly do that to your child? Like you left him alone when he's 9 years old and taking the subway by himself and whatnot, you know. But I was thinking, you know, to myself that I remember distinctly when I was like 9 or 10, like you know, this is a personal story here. My grandfather was visiting, and I remember going on the bus with my grandfather, and I was the one who was like telling him that, okay, we need to get off here, we need to like do this and go to these places and stuff like that. So, you know, I mean, just because a kid's 9 years old doesn't mean that somehow it's a bad thing, right? Now, of course, I don't want to advocate anything illegal, right? But anyway, the point being that it depends on the situation, right? So in general, right, like we want to give as much as possible. We want to not interfere too much, right? And at times we might actually deliberately say that, you know what, on this thing, we're going to let them make their mistake. I could interfere and even provide that guidance, but I'm not going to even do that. I'm going to let them make their mistake so that they learn the hard way. Because it's not that big of a deal. It's not going to be like, it's not something that's going to like cause like a lot of damage or anything like that. Let them make their mistake, whatever. I won't say anything about it. And other times I might say a little bit, just give them some pointers, right? Other times, no. You know, this is something which is actually, like, for example, the one you gave, that there's other children there, they might be harmed, right? It might, like, let's say, just bad things could occur from this, right? There could be whatever. So in that case, no, I want to be more specific. And, you know, a child they don't need to have complete independence and freedom in everything. As long as they're tasting that, you know, in some things, right, then they'll be like, okay, you know, my parents do respect the fact that I need this choice, I need this independence. I'm okay with being told what to do. Let's say when I go out to somebody's house or when I come to the masjid, I can't be as free as I would normally be. And I think this balance is where sometimes parents struggle with, like, because it's kind of, you can't just take one approach to every situation. Okay? Yeah.
You know, I feel like most of the time we don't want to take the time to, let's say, go over the prep stage of the situation, right? And then we always end up spending that time later by, you know, the situations we face, like this lady with the 9-year-old.
Yeah.
I'm sure she had prepped her son to the point where he wanted to do this on his own, where like maybe a lot of kids would be like, no way, you know, you're crazy. But I just want to share a really fun but also kind of scary story about video games, which happened to one of our people that we know. Is that this son, he wanted to play video games, and he asked his dad to play with him because he was often alone. So his father started playing with him. So the father got addicted. The son let go of the game, and the father is now addicted. So the son doesn't even like video games anymore, but the father now plays it maybe, you know, a few hours a day. So I was thinking about, because, you know, I always kind of talk about how one of the biggest ways our children are being robbed from us is through, you know, the whole video game industry, and how, you know, it got the parents. So that's kind of something that.
Thank you. Okay, let's recite salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad.